Well, Gerald Steinberg is a professor of political science at Israel's Bar Ilan University, and he joins me from Halifax in Canada. Now, can you tell us more about what Benjamin Netanyahu has been charged with?
There are three cases that involve that he's been going to be indicted for. One of them involves getting gifts. The estimate is, at least from the Attorney General, of at least $200,000 worth of champagne and cigars in exchange for arranging a visa for a well-known Israeli who lives in the United States and using his using his influence. That's one of the charges. The other two are more in the realm of media and communications. Netanyahu has always been concerned about what he sees as bad press, and both of those cases involve trying to manipulate the press by making promises to do things to help the journalists or the media platforms, the owners of the media platforms in one case. In another case, by putting his own people in and helping in major government ministries, communication ministry positions, and using that as a means of both helping them and the two firms that are involved, but also in exchange for getting better media coverage for himself. So that's a pretty broad range of issues that the Attorney General has decided to indict him on.
Indeed. Professor Steinberg, I guess what we're all interested in is how these charges might affect Benjamin Netanyahu's ability to campaign for a possible third round of elections.
There are different ways of looking at this. And it is certainly seen in Israel as a very depressing and sad day that we have to go through this process. And it does come right at the beginning of the last phase. Our political system is very much divided, pretty much 50-50. And as a result, neither Mr. Netanyahu and his Likud party was able to form a coalition, nor the main opponents, the former chief of staff, Benjamin Gantz. Neither of them were able to form a government, get a majority in the Knesset. This is the second round of elections that we had the stalemate. So unless a government is formed in some way in the next 3 weeks, we're going to go to a third round. The question is, as Israelis have been talking about now for the last few days, how is this indictment going to affect them? Netanyahu's core supporters, his constituency, are going to rally around him. We already see that. On the other hand, those people who are perhaps wavering and see this as he's been in office for 10 years and see these charges as a validation that it's time for a new prime minister, a new political leadership, will probably turn out in larger numbers. He's likely to have more of a difficulty in the next round, the third round of elections. But he does see this as an opportunity to rally his supporters and say that this is, and he's used this term, this is a coup or an attempted coup against the democratic system by a group of people in the legal system, the judicial system, and he's going to use that theme very hard. The question is whether the courts will allow him to stay on as prime minister. That's very ambiguous. This is unprecedented, and therefore we'll have to see how this whole process, it's going to take time to how it's going to develop.
How much time? When are we expecting Mr. Netanyahu to face trial, and how might the timeline affect his election ambitions?
If we're going to go to new elections, it's going to probably be in the middle of March. And trial dates probably are significantly after that because there are going to be many, many court cases that are going to argue that Mr. Netanyahu is immune because he's a member of the Knesset. There is immunity for members of the Knesset. He would have to waive that immunity if he went to court. Because he's a prime minister, not an ordinary minister, the argument is made that these kind of regulations that require a minister who's under indictment to resign do not apply to him. So we're going to see a lot of legal cases, a lot of legal jockeying. And the Israeli court system does move relatively slowly and carefully. So I think that any trial of Mr. Netanyahu will not take place until after a third election if we get there. And they're going to see a lot more friction in the political system as a result.
Well, meanwhile, what are the next steps for deciding who governs Israel?
Right now, we're in the third period. I call it an overtime period. After both leading candidates were unable to get a majority in the Knesset to form a coalition of more than half, there are a number of small parties that constitute close to 40% of the entire electorate. And those parties have to decide where they stand, and neither could really put together a coalition that would work. So now we have a period, which is also unprecedented, of 21 days, and now we're down, I think, to 19, in which any member of the Knesset, we have 120 members of our parliament, and any member of that group can say to the president of the country, I have a list of 61 members who have agreed to support me. Now, that might be someone from Mr. Netanyahu's own party. There are reports that Gideon Sa'ar, who has been quarreling with Mr. Netanyahu, they had a major public conflict. Sar resigned from the Knesset for a number of years. He's back in now. And he may try to put together an alternative government, a unity government in those 3 weeks that we have. That's a lot of maneuvering that's going to take place. And we'll see it come down to the wire. It's still possible that Netanyahu and Gantz, for the sake of the country, we've had a lot of friction in the region, and there's a lot of tension, military tension, with expanding Iran on our borders. There was a major IDF, Israeli military response to Iranian threats in the north a few days ago. And it may be that Netanyahu and Gantz, who was a former chief of staff, will decide for the good of the country, as well as perhaps for their own political interests, to get together and still form a unity government. So all of those options are still on the table, and we'll have to see how it develops.
Indeed, we will. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Professor Gerald Steinberg. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.